The void between decks. The first time I heard the screams through the ventilation shaft, I convinced myself it was just metal fatigue. 12 years working maintenance on military vessels teaches you that ships make all kinds of noises, especially massive ones like the UES Dauntless, currently cutting through deep space somewhere near the Epsilon Eridani system. At least that's where I thought we were. Lower deck maintenance techs don't exactly get regular navigation briefings. My name is Callum Reeves, service number 47829-MT, 14 years in the United Earth Fleet, and the last 12 spent crawling through maintenance tunnels, fixing environmental regulators, and unclogging waste reclamation filters. Not exactly the heroic space adventure I'd imagined when I enlisted, but it pays the bills and keeps me far away from the war-torn colony I once called home. Cal, you listening? I need that pressure valve calibrated before next shift. Joanna's voice crackled through my earpiece, startling me from my thoughts. Yeah, sorry. On it, I replied, twisting the regulator key with practiced precision. Joe was my direct supervisor, tough but fair, and one of the few people aboard who treated lower deck crew like actual humans instead of walking repair tools. The Dauntless had been deployed for nearly 6 months on what Command called a strategic deterrence mission. We lower deckers had our theories about what that really meant. Most likely hunting the Xelid, the crystalline alien species that had appeared in our space 3 years ago and immediately started glassing our outer colonies. But officially, we weren't at war. Officially, we were still in diplomatic engagement. Tell that to my brother who died on Proxima B when the Xelid turned the atmosphere to fire. The ship had been on high alert for weeks, more armed Marines patrolling the corridors. Restricted access to the upper decks, whispers about strange sensor readings. But no one told us anything concrete. We just kept the engines running, the water flowing, and the oxygen pumping while the officers made the decisions that might get us all killed. I finished the calibration and was sealing up the access panel when I heard it again. That sound. Not quite a scream this time. More like chittering, like thousands of tiny crystal shards being rubbed together. It lasted only a second, then silence. Joe, I said into my comm, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you adjust the atmospheric mix in Section 14? I'm hearing some weird resonance in the vents. Negative, she replied. All atmospheric systems are running standard. Maybe check the vibration dampeners while you're down there. I agreed, but I knew the dampeners were fine. I checked them myself just yesterday. Something else was making that noise. That night in the maintenance crew quarters, I couldn't sleep. The quarters were cramped. 12 bunks in a room meant for 8, with personal storage limited to a locker the size of a microwave. Privacy was a luxury reserved for officers. Torres, the bunk below mine, was snoring loudly. Rodriguez and Patel were playing cards in the corner. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about that sound. Hey, anyone else hearing weird stuff in the ventilation lately? I asked the room at large. Rodriguez looked up from her cards. Like what? I don't know, sounds like scratching or a high-pitched whine? Probably just the new drive core, Patel said without looking up. They upgraded it during our last dock. Makes all kinds of weird harmonics. I let it drop. Maybe they were right, but something in my gut told me otherwise. The next day, Captain Mercer's voice came over the ship-wide comm, a rare occurrence that immediately set everyone on edge. Attention all personnel. We have encountered an anomalous debris field and will be conducting emergency maneuvers. All crew to secure stations. This is not a drill. The klaxon sounded and I scrambled to my assigned emergency post. Waste reclamation control, because someone has to make sure we don't drown in our own filth, even during a crisis. Glamorous work. The ship lurched violently, sending me crashing into a bulkhead. The lights flickered, then emergency red came on. Not good. Breach in Sector 8, someone shouted over the comm. Multiple hull penetrations. My blood ran cold. Sector 8 was 2 decks up but directly above our crew quarters. Whatever had breached the hull was close. The ship rocked again, harder this time. I heard the distinctive whine of the point defense systems engaging. We were under attack. Hours passed in a blur of emergency protocols, damage control, and panic. Fragmented reports filtered down to us. Something about crystalline projectiles penetrating the hull, about strange readings on the internal sensors. But no official word on what was happening. It was during my fourth straight hour of rerouting waistlines around damaged sections that I saw it. I was alone in a narrow maintenance corridor when movement caught my eye. Something skittering across the floor ahead of me. Something that glinted like glass under my flashlight. It was roughly the size of a rat, but shaped wrong. All sharp angles and translucent facets. It moved in quick, jerky motions, leaving tiny scratches on the metal flooring. A Xelid scout drone. I'd seen footage of these things from the colony attacks. They preceded the larger warriors, mapping human environments, learning our weaknesses. I raised my maintenance wrench, ready to smash it, when something much bigger dropped from the ceiling vent behind it. This one was the size of a large dog, with limbs that terminated in crystalline points that clicked against the metal deck. Its central mass was a complex geometric structure that pulsed with internal light. It had no eyes that I could see, but somehow I knew it was looking at me. I ran. Protocol be damned. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. "Intruders on deck F!" I screamed into my comm as I sprinted through the corridors. "Xelid drones in the maintenance tubes." "Reeves, calm down and report properly," came the response from security. "There's no time." I was gasping for breath now. "They're inside the ship, small ones and big ones. Section 22, Deck F." I heard the security officer relaying my report, skepticism clear in his voice. They didn't believe me. Why would they? I was just a waste technician. I rounded a corner and collided with Jo. She grabbed my shoulders to steady me. "Whoa, Cal, what's going on?" "Xelid," I managed between gasps. "In the ship. Saw them." Her eyes widened. "Are you sure?" Before I could answer, the lights went out completely. Even the emergency lighting failed. We were in absolute darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before the dim backup systems kicked in. "Cal," Jo whispered, "run to command. Tell them what you saw. I'll try to seal off this section." "They won't listen to me," I said. She pressed something into my hand, her security clearance badge. "They will with this. Go. Now." I hesitated. Leaving her alone felt wrong. "That's an order, technician," she barked. I went. The journey to command was a nightmare. The ship was in chaos. Emergency bulkheads had sealed automatically, forcing me to take roundabout routes through maintenance shafts. Twice I encountered more of the crystalline entities, having to backtrack and find another way. The sounds were everywhere now, that chittering, scraping noise echoing through the vents and walls. I reached Deck A, using Jo's badge to access areas normally forbidden to someone of my rank. I was met by a squad of Marines in full combat gear. "How did you get up here?" one demanded, weapon raised. "I need to speak to command," I said, showing Jo's badge. "I have critical information about the intruders." The Marine hesitated, then nodded to another. "Take him to Lieutenant Voss." I was escorted not to the bridge but to a makeshift command post in what looked like an officer's mess hall. Officers and senior crew huddled around displays, their faces grim. In the center, a tall woman with commander's insignia was giving orders. "Ma'am," the Marine interrupted, "maintenance tech from lower decks. Says he has information about the intruders." Lieutenant Voss, presumably the woman in charge, looked at me with undisguised suspicion. "How did you get up here, technician?" "Reeves, ma'am. Service number 47829-MT. I used my supervisor's clearance. She ordered me to report directly." I swallowed hard. "I've seen the Xelid. They're in the maintenance tunnels, using the ventilation system to move throughout the ship." Voss's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. "Tell me exactly what you saw. Leave nothing out." So I did. The small drone, the larger entity, the sounds I'd been hearing for days. When I finished, she turned to a nearby officer. Cross-reference with the internal sensor anomalies. The officer worked his console, then looked up in alarm. "Match. The disruptions are following maintenance paths and ventilation routes, just as he described." Voss made a decision. "Patterson, get this man to a console. I want every maintenance tunnel, every vent shaft, every access point mapped out. You know the systems better than anyone, Technician Reeves. You're going to help us fight back." Suddenly, I was part of the command team, pointing out vulnerable areas, suggesting ways to isolate sections, explaining how the ship's own systems could be weaponized against the invaders. Years of crawling through the Dauntless's guts had given me knowledge that none of the bridge crew possessed. We learned the Xelid had launched hundreds of tiny crystalline shards at the ship, not to destroy it, but to penetrate it. Each shard contained a seed that could grow into the entities I had seen. They were converting the ship's materials into more of themselves, building a colony inside our vessel. And they were heading for the drive core. If they reached the core containment, they could trigger a cascade failure, an engineer explained. The whole ship would be destroyed. Can we eject the core? Voss asked. Negative, the engineer replied. Those systems are offline. I spoke up. There's a manual override in maintenance shaft 7B. It bypasses the main controls. All eyes turned to me. Could you access it? Voss asked. I nodded slowly, realizing what I was volunteering for. Yes, ma'am, but I'd have to go back down there, through territory they've already taken. Voss looked at me for a long moment. I won't order you to do this, Technician Reeves. With respect, ma'am, you don't have to. I thought of Joe, still down there somewhere, of my brother, of all the colonies already lost. Just give me a weapon and some backup. 20 minutes later, I was crawling through a service tunnel with a plasma cutter that had been hastily modified into a makeshift weapon, 2 Marines behind me. The plan was simple. Reach the override, eject the core, evacuate in the ship's lifeboats before the Xelid could spread to them. The chittering sound was constant now. We could feel vibrations through the hull, thousands of crystalline feet moving in unison. How much further? Whispered Chen, one of the Marines. 2 more junctions, I replied, checking the ship's schematic on my borrowed tablet. We reached the first junction without incident. As I prepared to open the access hatch to the next section, I heard something moving on the other side. I held up a fist like I'd seen officers do in combat vids. The Marines tensed behind me, weapons ready. Slowly, I cranked the manual release. The hatch swung open, revealing Joe, bloody and wild-eyed, clutching a jagged piece of metal as a weapon. Cal, she gasped, nearly collapsing with relief. You're alive. We pulled her into our tunnel, securing the hatch behind her. What happened? I asked, checking her for serious injuries. They're changing the ship, she said, voice shaking. Converting it. Metal, plastic, even organic matter. They're turning it all into more crystal. Section 22 is completely transformed. Like an alien hive. The Marines exchanged worried glances. We need to move, I said. Get to the core override before they do. Joe nodded, pulling herself together. I'm coming with you. The next section was worse than I'd imagined. The walls were covered in crystalline growths that pulsed with the same internal light I'd seen in the larger entities. The air felt wrong, sharp somehow, as if filled with microscopic shards. We moved as quietly as possible, but it was difficult not to step on the crystal formations spreading across the floor. Every crunch felt deafening. The override station was just ahead, a small alcove with a manual control panel for emergency core ejection. As we approached, I saw something that made my heart sink. A massive Xelid entity, easily the size of a small car, was wrapped around the control panel. Unlike the others, this one had a clearly defined structure that almost resembled a humanoid upper body, with multiple crystalline limbs extending from a central mass. It appeared to be interfacing directly with the ship's systems. We can't get past that thing, Chen whispered. Joe pointed to a secondary maintenance tube that ran parallel to our position. There's another approach, through the coolant monitoring station. I nodded. Lead the way. The alternate route was tight, barely large enough for the Marines to squeeze through in their combat gear. It brought us out behind the Xelid entity, with the override panel just a few meters away. I'll distract it, said Ramirez, the second Marine. You get to the controls. Before we could argue, he fired his weapon at the ceiling above the creature. Crystal shards rained down, and the entity whirled with surprising speed, multiple limbs lashing out at the perceived threat. I sprinted for the controls, sliding the last meter on my knees. The panel was partially crystallized, but the main override lever was still accessible. I grabbed it with both hands and pulled with all my strength. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the lever moved. Alarms blared throughout the ship. Core ejection sequence initiated. All personnel evacuate. T-minus 5 minutes to ejection. The Xelid entity shrieked, a sound like 1,000 windows shattering at once, and lunged toward me. Chen opened fire, her rounds shattering pieces of the creature, but not stopping it. Joe pulled me back just as a crystalline limb smashed into the control panel where I'd been standing. "Run!" she shouted. We fled back the way we came, the sounds of combat and alien screeching fading behind us. Emergency evacuation routes were illuminated along the corridors as we emerged from the maintenance tunnels. "Ramirez?" I asked Chen as we ran. She just shook her head. We reached the nearest lifeboat bay with 2 minutes to spare. It was chaos. Crew members pushing to get aboard, officers trying to maintain order. We squeezed into one of the last available boats. The small craft launched automatically, joining dozens of others streaming away from the Dauntless. Through the viewport, I watched as the massive ship grew smaller in the distance. There was a flash of blinding light as the drive core ejected. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the core detonated, and the Dauntless was engulfed in a sphere of energy that quickly collapsed in on itself. When the light faded, there was nothing left but scattered debris. In the cramped confines of the lifeboat, a senior officer looked at his tablet. All accounted for except... He consulted the list. Technician Joanna Vega. I turned to look at Joe, who was sitting quietly beside me. She gave me a small, sad smile. "I didn't make it out of Section 22, she said softly, so only I could hear. "They got me there. Converted me. What you've been seeing, it's just a projection, a copy they made from my memories." As I watched in horror, her form flickered, revealing glimpses of crystalline structure beneath her human appearance. "I fought it as long as I could," she continued. "Used what control I had to help you. But I can feel them calling to me. The others who survived the blast are regrouping." "Joe!" I reached toward her, then hesitated. "I'm sorry, Cal. I had to get on this boat. Had to warn you." Her image stabilized, becoming solid again. "This isn't over. They learn. They adapt. And now they know how humans think." She stood up. No one else in the crowded lifeboat seemed to notice her. "I'll try to buy you some time." Before I could stop her, she walked to the airlock. The door opened for her, impossible at this velocity, and closed again after she stepped through. No alarm sounded. No air rushed out. No one else had seen a thing. I stared at the closed airlock, understanding dawning with cold clarity. The Xelid weren't just invading our ships and colonies. They were learning to become us, and I was the only one who knew. On the viewport screen, emergency coordinates appeared. A rescue ship was en route to collect survivors. We would be debriefed, reassigned, sent back into the fight with our stories of heroism and sacrifice. But as I watched tiny crystalline lights begin to glitter among the debris field of the Dauntless, I knew the real war was just beginning. And somehow I, Callum Reeves, waste technician and nobody, was going to have to convince command of the truth before it was too late. I stared at my reflection in the viewport glass. For just a moment, I thought I saw my eyes glint with an internal, crystalline light. Just a trick of the emergency lighting, surely. Surely.
Every story has an end, but there's always another waiting to be told. Subscribe to Steve's Stories for more sci-fi, dystopian, and war-driven adventures, from short tales to full novels. Like the video, hit the bell, and join me on this journey through worlds unknown.